I do want to focus on the positive. I think there's a lot of positive that's going on. I actually feel quite optimistic, and there's some kind of change that is accelerating. And yeah, I want to keep my energy in supporting that and enabling that to happen. And I think my optimism lies in the belief that ultimately love is the strongest um, force, energy of all, that love will prevail, and that if enough people are coming from that place of love within themselves and then can move from there into understanding what that means for who they are and how they relate to other people, and then if they can move on to that and shift their belief system, which is where I think worldview becomes very important, they can understand that there is far more to reality and can be experienced with the five senses, and they're prepared to be open to what that is, then they'll start getting the opportunities that they require. And that brings us back to synchronicity, Bernie, because what I always say is if you're open to possibilities, if you're open to something being different to how you understand it to be at the moment, if you believe on some level, but you can't trust in it fully yet, but if you can act as if life has purpose and meaning, as if it's a trustworthy universe, saying trust the universe, if you can just open up, trust the universe, then you'll find that the synchronicities happen and things will come in which actually support you on that kind of journey.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to getting deeply into a question that has been surfacing more and more regularly on this podcast, Connecting with Coincidences, and we hope you'll join in the discussion as well as thinking about the subject yourself. We'll talk about consciousness and what is consciousness. It's a term that's being used quite a lot these days. But what does it actually mean? Well, we have an educator in consciousness studies for our guest today, and she'll elucidate some of the questions, especially involving the difference between spirituality and consciousness. And we'll start off with that as we get into what is consciousness. Our guest today is Joan Walton, and she's a senior lecturer in education at York St. John University in the UK. Her research interests include investigating post-materialist ideas. Post-materialist means getting beyond the brain, about consciousness and exploring what relevance these ideas have for education. That is, trying to get education about consciousness into where students are, not just older people discussing it. She is chair of the board of the Scientific and Medical Network, which is no small task, serves on the Galileo Commission Steering Committee, and chair of the Executive Committee of the International Network for the Study of Spirituality. You can view her profile in the bio below. So, Joan, welcome again to Connecting with Coincidence. Glad to have you back.
It's a pleasure to be here, Bernie. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, we've been looking forward to it, and here we are. So let me ask you the question we started off with when we first were doing this idea of having you discuss again with me major ideas. What, Joan Walton, is consciousness?
Oh, you're asking me a question, and to summarize what has been basically a kind of over 40-year inquiry, Bernie.
Indeed, I am.
So, do you want me to start with where the journey started, or do you want me to start with where I've come to at this point in time?
Where you've come to at this point,
okay.
Please.
So, my inquiry so far has taken me to the fact of that consciousness is fundamental to the universe. In fact, I have, just to start us off, I've got a one-pager which kind of summarizes what where I stand with my understanding of consciousness, which I will try and share because it's kind of, can you see that
Yes.
clearly?
Yes.
Okay. So I think there's a universal consciousness. I think it's an energy that's infinite and eternal. There are no boundaries and there's no separation. And it has the integral qualities of love and creativity, and it has intelligence. And also, I think that it contains all that is and ever has been. So within consciousness, there's been about 113 billion human beings lived during this time, as well as many other different kinds of species and human beings and uh, non-human intelligences, in fact. And I think all of those experiences are stored in this infinite and eternal consciousness, and they are there for us to draw on should we wish to access. It holds a learning and a wisdom that is a resource for us, those of us who are uh, experiencing this current incarnation, to draw on and to learn how to express this universal consciousness more purely in daily life. So, my understanding is that we as human beings are each unique expressions of this infinite and eternal reality, and that the memories that we have, and this conversation that we're having now, Bernie, it will remain, and it will be retained in that ultimate consciousness. So nothing is ever lost. And so when we die, we basically move on to a different order of existence. But in a sense, it's all taking place between that infinite and eternal consciousness.
It really sounds a lot like God to me.
I think I think it's true. I think, but the problem is, as Karen Armstrong said, there are as many definitions of God as there are the numbers of people. There are hundreds and thousands, billions of definitions of God. So I'm very loath to use that word because it's so um, culturally defined by the individuals who use it. And many people use God as something that is a being that is separate from them. And that is not the sense that I'm using it. In my ontology, there is no separation. Separation is an illusion. And just to clarify, I know ontology is one of the most difficult words to understand. By ontology, what I mean is a theory of reality, a theory of being, what we believe is the ultimate nature of reality. And when we try to express that ultimate nature of reality, we're talking about our ontological perspective. So for me, that ultimate nature of reality is what is, which I'm calling consciousness, and it's infinite and eternal. What many people to mean when they talk about God is that there is an external being out there, up in the clouds somewhere, or in a different kind of reality, and He, generally He, made human beings, and we as human beings exist separately from that God. That is that is just not the sense that I'm meaning at all. So I tend to avoid the word God because of that kind of different meanings of it. But I can completely understand that when I give my particular way of understanding reality, you might say that sounds like God.
Yeah, and God, there's all kinds of definition of consciousness also, but I think it gets more refined as we use our minds to try to understand its nuances, as you did in our slide. And so, thank you for describing ontology. Ontology is the nature of reality, is what I'll use as an equivalent. Is this is what is this out here? And that's where I use meaningful coincidences as a way of probing how that reality out there operates, because it's ongoing, interactive. Synchronicities, mind, object are connected, and somehow environment with self are connected. So that tells us something about where we are in this ontology and this reality. Epistemology is definitely related, but different. So, what is epistemology?
Okay, that's a really good question. And yeah, I've spent quite a bit of time with others exploring the relationship between um, uh, ontology and epistemology. And then specifically in relation to this, I see spirituality as epistemology. And I have another sense, and by that I mean how we come to know that infinite and eternal reality. So if I'm saying that consciousness is foundational and it's infinite and eternal and nothing is ever lost, and that's in our ontology, I see spirituality as the means by which we come to know that reality. And epistemology is how we come to know the nature of ultimate reality. So I can share this screen and give my sense of spirituality as well, and you'll see how it connects to what I've so far said. So, spirituality is the different, unique, but equally valuable ways in which human beings experience and come to know the universal consciousness. And that is epistemology. So, when we're seeking to come to know the nature of ultimate reality, it's that ways of knowing that is epistemology. And so, as you'll see here, there are many different ways of knowing. There are the more traditional ways that, again, people will associate with the word God or religion, like prayer or meditation. But there are many varied ways, like being in nature, looking at wonderful art, even engaging with young children and with their kind of purity and innocence and that kind of connection with young children. So spirituality is how we experience our sense of connection with what we feel to be ultimate reality. And that brings us into the sense of interiority, because you talked about consciousness and our theories of consciousness. Actually, I haven't come to my understanding of consciousness through theorizing, really. Theorizing takes a secondary role. My theory has emerged out of my experience. So I feel we come to know who we are and where we're from through deep inner experience. And I think it's that sense of our own interiority and getting to know our own interiority and being prepared to share that with others. That is part of the challenge of being human, and we're increasingly realizing the difficulties that have been created through neglecting interiority.
Part of interiority, I think you use the word metacognition. Um, how does metacognition, or what I refer to more specifically as a self-observer, influence how you process your understanding of consciousness?
Well, it's how we get to know our inner world, really. So it's going deeply within, and whatever methods we use, whether it's um, meditation, whether it's deep contemplation, whether it's just being completely still and seeing what arises, whether it's trusting our intuition, it's whatever uh, approach or whatever means we have of accessing what is going on within us and trusting that as a genuine experience, not doing as our kind of materialist world would have us do, is saying, well, this is just the neuronal firing of the brain. It's an illusion. It doesn't really count in terms of understanding what it means to be human. I'm almost turning that on its head, and many others do also, and say, actually, we should start with our interior lives. We should start with our inner experiences, and in fact, everything that we experience, including the external world, starts as an internal experience. We experience the external world first through our inner inner reality.
Yeah, that the brain as a filter is still a good idea because
Yeah.
there's so much information coming in. You got to like do something to make it practical here on this three-dimensional reality. So our inner experience is a representation of the reality outside. It can't be the actual thing itself, and that's part of the problem. Plato and Plato's cave was an illustration of this. There's something else going on, but we can only look inside unless we somehow immerse ourselves in that greater consciousness. Now, as you talk about this and metacognition and inner experience, uh, there's a part of ourselves that observes that inner experience. Could you tell us about how you understand that observer or of the inner experience?
Well, I guess that is how we create some kind of bridge between our internal world and our external world, and how we draw on our internal world to help advise or guide what we do in the external world. So I have historically done this through a kind of form of journaling, almost a form of automatic writing. So I will uh, go into a deep meditative state and really immerse myself in that interiority, and then just begin to write, and words will come out onto the page, and then at a later stage I'll look at I'll read those words, and sometimes I'll very often oh, so that's what was going on at that kind of level, and I'll learn from that process. I'll learn from what came up from some kind of unknown place. I'll uh, understand what is coming from that, and then it'll help me make sense of what is going on for me. And then for the next step, there is so what does that mean for how I live my life? What does that mean for the decisions I make about this life? So the reflecting on being aware, if you like, is for me in that process at a different level. It comes as a kind of further stage in that automatic writing process.
I definitely like being aware of being aware, just as you imply it. And the awareness of awareness comes from looking at what you've written so that you can see what had been happening inside of you. Could you
Yeah.
give us an example of something you've learned through this process of almost automatic writing after being in deep and letting the interiority become exteriority?
Oh, I mean, that's a lifetime's journey, Bernie. But let me go back. I think in this, I would go back to when I very first started this whole process, because I think that's probably quite important in terms of where I had started this interest in consciousness. And I may have said it in my last conversation with you, but I went straight from school to working in residential childcare. So was working with very damaged young people from uh, difficult backgrounds, from parents who were either divorced or in prison or drug addicted or various forms of not constructive ways of life, and they were traumatized, and I was 18 at the time, having been brought up in a loving and caring family, and I then was traumatized through experiencing their trauma. I didn't really understand how it was possible for there to be so much suffering for children in care, and um, I was brought up in a very strong Christian family. I was the daughter of Christian missionaries. So I've been brought up in that very strong Christian way of understanding reality, and the idea of a good and benevolent God. So, although I had rejected Christianity, there's an element of it still there, thinking, how is it possible if there is a kind of loving God at the core of anything? How is such suffering possible? And um, I was training to be a social worker and wanted to find a way to address the suffering of children, of these children, and really discovered that it wasn't possible. It was like putting a sticking plaster on something that needed major surgery. So I became quite political and into social activism, and then realized that again at a different level, political structures were such that injustices were inbuilt. There was this focus on the external world. There was not the interest in children's interiority and their emotional lives. And so that was the point where I said to myself, um, this is going to need a transformation in consciousness. And 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 I was involved. I'd read Carl Jung. I'd got involved in depth psychology. It was through that method of initiating the active imagination that I got into this form of deep contemplative practice that led to automatic writing. And at that point in time, also, I was a bit of, I was not, because I was deeply depressed and because I was struggling with what it means to be human and because I was struggling with how can there be anything benevolent in this world if such suffering is possible, I started that deep journaling, asking those kind of questions, and so slowly, what happened was, um, I came to a deeper understanding of reality through that form of writing, and so what I'd be looking at is a sense of the fact that suffering is an outcome of our process of learning how to become more fully human. I learned that at the core of our being is this infinite and eternal loving reality seeking to express itself in a different kind of form. So we were that ultimate reality seeking to express itself in a different form. And we were at a very early stage of that process, and we need to learn how to do that better. So it was going into that deep place within myself and doing the journaling and then looking at what came out of it that slowly guided me in the journey that has taken me and moved me into one space and then in the other, and meeting people who were involved in similar kind of journeys, and has really contributed a considerable amount to where I have got to today, and engaging much more widely about this question about what is consciousness, seeing the importance of education about consciousness, and just seeing how far I can go on this learning journey in this particular incarnation of life.
That's very well said. Thank you for that. The what I hear, and we all filter in our own ways, is that you are encouraging people to explore their own interiority, their own subjective experience. That's fundamental to what you had to do. You saw that the children you met with at age 18, when who were traumatized, did not have much of a sense of interiority. Nobody was interested in what was going on inside of them. And you saw that as a major deficit for those children. And you see that in a more general sense as a deficit for humanity, that we don't have enough of a sense of interiority. So when I ask you, what is consciousness? I think you are saying, find out for yourself by going inside yourself, because
Mhm.
that's where you'll be able to answer the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody has to do their own journey in going into their own interiority and exploring that means what that means for them. Because we all come in different ways into this incarnation. I mean I actually feel that we've had different experiences beforehand. I'm not sure how that happens or in what way, but I think we come into this world. I feel very much that I came into this world with a sense of purpose, with a reason for being here. So part of that journey is discovering what that reason is, and I think everybody is the same. So and that is different for every person. You cannot do that by imitating someone else. Everybody has to go to their deep inner selves and find out for themselves. The other reason I think you can't avoid this journey is that I think, people talk about spiritual awakening and people talk about the different ways in which we can achieve some kind of spiritual awakening, and people use psychedelics, and there's an increasing interest in UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, and non-human intelligences for coming to help us out. But actually, I tend to see all of these things as triggers for people, just to make them aware that there is something more than us, that there are different expressions of consciousness. But uh, the idea always the motivation always, the energy always is you need to do your own journey. You cannot rely on outside sources to do that journey for you. You cannot just take that and say, "Oh, I've had this amazing experience. I now know there's a wonderful reality out there, and I want to just go and mix with other people who feel the same." Um, there's a real impetus and an importance on people saying, "Okay, that means that I have a responsibility really to find out what that means for me as an individual, and then to take that step and start what is a very challenging process of the internal journey."
If I understood you correctly, Joan, each person has to find their own way, their own purpose, and part of the consciousness exploration includes finding that purpose, that unique reason that you're here at this time and at this place. And you seem to couple that with finding other people who are on similar journeys, uh, but not the same because they're not you and you're not them. Did I understand you correctly?
That part is very important, Bernie. When I was in my 20s and doing this, I was doing this on my own, and it was very tough. Um, but as the years have gone on, and particularly recently, there's an increasing number of people recognizing what I'm saying, understanding that there is a wider reality, really understanding that consciousness is foundational, and that we're all interconnected within consciousness, and an increasing number of people really feeling that we are expressions of that ultimate consciousness. So we can go on that journey together because we're all interconnected on one level. We are all involved in the same challenge. We're all involved in the same journey, but we each have our own unique paths. So um, it's getting that paradox of we're all in the same journey, we're all interconnected, we can all support each other, but each of us has to find out what that means for us as an individual. And I
Oh,
have to say here that I think a really important person in this whole process is Federico Fagin. I don't if you I think Federico Fagin is coming out with an understanding of reality that takes what many of the kind of what I'm saying now, in fact, and what many of the kind of uh, religious and spiritual traditions have said, particularly the Eastern ones, to agree that there's a universal consciousness and that there's an ultimate reality. But he is then shaping that and expressing that in giving a scientific explanation for it, and is providing a model of reality that helps anyone who understands this as an important individual journey, but wants to understand it within a kind of scientific framework. And I think Federico is helping that process a huge amount. And his basic ontology, his basic understanding of reality is what he calls the one, which again, it might take up your challenge and say this is God, but again, there can be the misinterpretation of that. But there is the one, which is foundational, and the one has love and free will. He uses free will. I tend to use creativity. He uses free will, one and free will, and we are each unique expressions of the one, and we are the one seeking to know itself. And so, anyone interested in understanding more of that kind of process, with that kind of ontological understanding of the world, that kind of understanding of an infinite and eternal reality that has the core qualities of love and free will or creativity, I would suggest that they tune in to Federico if they haven't already.
and if you haven't already, Federico was on the show quite a while ago, maybe 8 months ago, and it was a really fun interview for both of us. So one of his key ideas, as you've mentioned, Joan, is that the one is seeking to get to know itself through us.
Yeah. Or we are the one. We are expressions of the one. So it's not there's no separation. There's no separation. We are the one seeking to know itself. So we are the means by which the one is getting to know itself.
That confuses me actually. That separation you just did, or that distinction you just did, because the getting to know means that getting to know something outside of myself.
I don't know. I mean, this is what when we were talking about the journaling, and so in a sense, I'm going into that deep place and I'm writing, and whatever emerges is there, and then I look at it and I understand more what's going on within me. I don't see that there's a separation ultimately between me and the writing and my deep inner self. But I think it's about the translation of something that is unspoken, it's nonverbal, and you're trying to make sense of it in um, in a different form. So it's a little bit like translating from one language to other. If you translate from French to German, it means the same. It's the same thing, but there isn't a separation in the meaning. It's just understanding it in a different way. So I think if if the ultimate reality is the one, and it's seeking to know itself, but it's seeking to know itself in a different form to what it originally is. Because originally, it is invisible. It's it's, it's infinite, eternal. It's intangible, and what it's doing is seeking to know what it is or what it can do in this particular context, in a material form. So it's seeking to express itself in a material form. And so we are the one seeking to know itself or to express itself through uh, a different through a different form, through
Uh,
matter.
yes, and words are a problem. I agree. No matter what language you use, they're two-dimensional, or maybe a little three, but we're talking about something more expansive than that. And one of the ways that you suggest people can do that together is through a BOEM group. Could
Yeah.
you explain what happens in a BOEM group and how that helps each participant understand consciousness more fully?
Yeah, through Bohm dialogue, based on the thinking of David Bohm, who was a quantum physicist. And his idea was he talks about um, uh, manifest, and I'm trying to remember the words now, latent and manifest. And he believes that when a group of people come together, uh, if they are together in a particular kind of way, they can access a deeper reality, the unspoken reality that is between them, and they can find a way to make that unspoken reality manifest. So, in a sense, there are certain ground rules. So, if you get the people together and you have the ground rules of fairly commonsensical, really, but one person speak at a time, try to share the airspace between you, don't speak too long. One person doesn't speak too long at any one point in time. Um, what is more significant in most conversations is that you have a silence between each contribution, because the idea is that as much goes on in the silence as there is in the talking. So that's a fundamental principle that is the means by which you're uh, moving into a deeper reality that is beyond the spoken, and that you start with a question that is of shared interest. It could be something like, it could be anything, but just take, what does it mean to be human? Or what is consciousness? And you people are there being very reflective. But the point is not to just, oh, well, I think consciousness is this. And the next person says, no, I think it's this. And then you get into the kind of ding dong of debate or discussion, but rather sit in silence and allow what comes from within to emerge. Then speak when you're ready to. For those who've been in Quaker meetings, it's very much that principle: don't speak until you feel moved to do so. and then have a silence, and everybody just really takes in and listens to what has been said and just sees what impact that has on them, and then waits a while, and then another person might speak. And it can get, if people keep to those simple guidelines, the whole process can get very deep. It slows down, and what emerges from the end is a form of knowing that was not there in any one individual at the beginning. So it can be, if you like, a means of gaining considerable wisdom about a situation. And so David Bohm just felt that it was a means of accessing those interconnected, deeper aspects of of ourselves. That was a very practical way of recognizing what he saw to be the nature of quantum reality, in which everything is interconnected.
Those are two, as I understand it, two key rules here, or guidelines, rules, I'd say, where you don't talk too long, and the subject can be anything of interest to the group, usually around spirituality or consciousness, I imagine. I'd make it around meaningful coincidences if I had that to start a group like that,
Hmm.
and have each person say something. But the silence, and that's so important to know that being silent together is a
Yeah,
profound experience. People who love each other can enjoy those moments of quiet between them and have a connection that's profound. And that needs to be shown through other means. And you're describing a group in which that rule is there. Talk a little bit, silence, and only talk again the other person when you feel, and you have to know yourself well enough to know when the timing is right to be able to speak what is on your in your heart and in your mind. And what I'm wondering, Joan, is in those groups, what you're beginning to suggest is a group consciousness forms.
I think so. And I think also what's happening is, normally in discussion groups, or you go outside in a pub, people are just in the external world. It's chatter, chatter, talk about this, discuss politics. So it's focusing on the external world. What you're doing in Bohm dialogue is, in a sense, recognizing the primacy of interiority. So you're going back to where we started, in a sense, in terms of consciousness, in saying that our interior lives are important and the starting point. And Bohm dialogue recognizes that. So the process encourages you to center in your own inner life, in your own interiority, in what's going on with you at every level. And then, as it seems appropriate, sharing from that place. You're not sharing your beliefs and values in all the external world. You're sharing what is coming up for you in your interior, in your inner life. Other people are doing the same. And so what comes out is expressions of that interiority. And as we are all at a core level interconnected, if we are all indeed the one seeking to know itself, then we are each individually expressing that. And that comes into a form of group awareness, group connection through what comes from the sharing of our interiority, and is uh, demonstrates in terms of the powerful impact it has on us, demonstrates the sense that we feel very powerfully that interconnection. And actually, that does lead on. I mean, if you hear about synchronicity, um, people all often find in those kind of contexts that they're experiencing synchronicities, connections, that there is a real resonance between what's going on internally and what's going on externally. So, just synchronicity, as you know, has been an interest of mine for as long as I've been interested in consciousness, and it to me, it's an indicator that there is a resonance between our interiority and our exteriority, that we're in tune. We're living it in tune with each other along the way. And so if through Bohm dialogue, people are practicing doing that in participation with others, the synchronicities increase.
Yeah, from what you just said, it reminds me the possibility that synchronicity is where epistemology meets ontology.
I'll have to think about that one, but yes, how we know, we come to know through the relationship between, um, yeah, what we do in this reality and that our connection with that wider reality. Indeed.
Yeah, it's yeah. Um, and part of one of your mission, I'll say, is to have as many people that you can make contact with recognize we are all part of a greater consciousness, um, and that you emphasize how inner trust and interconnectedness lead to transformation and compassion in society.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think there are many individuals who understand that and believe that. I don't think an increasing number of people. Uh, and I think what we're finding now, Bernie, I'm sure you must find it as well, that over the past few years, there's been an increase in people interested in consciousness, interested in spirituality, interested in the relationship between each of them, interested in what synchronicities have to tell us about that and how they evidence that. And there's a huge amount of evidence that supports the idea that consciousness exists beyond the brain. So you started off by saying that materialism was about things, it starts with the brain, and materialism is really about believing that matter is the primary stuff of the universe and that everything, including consciousness, emerges from the brain. And when the brain goes, consciousness goes. And post materialism takes us beyond that and says that actually matter is most likely emergent from consciousness, that consciousness is the fundamental reality. And um, and there's huge amounts of evidence to support that. Near death experiences, out of body experiences, remote viewing, even, UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, the evidence for them is increasing. The kind of experiences people have with psychedelics, there doesn't seem to be any doubt that there is something more going on than we perceive with our five senses. But it hasn't hit our wider political institutions. You look at what's on the television, you read the newspapers and other media, and it is still grounded in a very materialist, individualized, separated form of understanding reality. And in schools and in all forms of education, children are still measured through exam results, through metrics. Ofsted comes in, and that's the government uh, inspection body in the UK, but you'll have the similar in America, I'm sure. Comes in and inspects schools mainly on external criteria, and there's not time, certainly in the UK system, for teachers to access their own interiority or to encourage children to develop their own intuition, to develop their own experience of spirituality, to trust their, get to know themselves, to ask questions about what was I born into this world to do. Um, and you don't find many adults in society who see those kind of questions as important. So one of the reasons we're very committed to a process of consciousness education is how do you enable wider society to become more aware of this different way of understanding reality? How do you enable members of the society to realize that their interior world counts, that it matters. What they do, the decisions that they make, how they make their choices, to trust their inner selves and to learn to trust their inner selves more and to learn to talk about that way of being with others more. It's it, we're very advanced in terms of our intellectual evolution and how we think of ideas out there and express them. But we're not very advanced in either our emotional evolution, our way of understanding ourselves, recognizing feelings in ourselves and others, and being able to deal with them appropriately, being able to understand and deal with the traumatic effects we've had in our lives, and we're not very advanced in terms of our understanding of the spiritual dimensions of the world. And I don't think we should separate those out. There should be an integration of emotional, spiritual, intellectual, but they're seen very much as separate in our society. So, what we're trying to do with our consciousness education initiative is to address this challenge and to look for many and varied ways of enabling people to be aware of different ways of understanding themselves and wider reality, which could be transformative in its impact on individual and social lives.
Well, I take what you're saying as to an emphasis on interiority that can be that you can have a variety of experiences or get to interior experiences in a variety of ways can happen just every day, simple
Yeah,
things happening. And that's where I emphasize meaningful coincidences, because they aren't the dramatic NDEs or psychedelic mystical experiences or seeing unidentified anomalous objects out there. It's like it happens all the time, or regularly with people if you pay attention to it. So that's my part in all this.
absolutely.
It's like to get where you are trying to have humanity get, which is to be more aware of their own interiority, is to say it, or more subjective experiences, another way of saying some of that. Interiority makes it much wider. I like the term because it's vast room in there, not just a subject of observation. Interiority is, hey, there's a big place in there, a big something in there you can pay attention to. And as you know, and one of the reasons I think you're driven to do this consciousness education for younger people and any adults that you can get your mind on uh, is that the humanity is in a suicidal trajectory right now. We're heading ourselves into the sixth major extinction. And you haven't said it, but I think you've implied that your education in consciousness is part of an effort among increasingly more people to take us off that
Yeah,
trajectory.
yeah, absolutely. And people call it the meta crisis. I don't tend to look at the news or listen to what's going out there because, it's too disruptive. I I do want to focus on the positive. I think there's a lot of positive that's going on. I actually feel quite optimistic, and there's some kind of change that is accelerating. And yeah, I want to keep my energy in supporting that and enabling that to happen. And I think my optimism lies in the belief that ultimately love is the strongest um, force, energy of all, that love will prevail, and that if enough people are coming from that place of love within themselves and then can move from there into understanding what that means for who they are and how they relate to other people, and then if they can move on to that and shift their belief system, which is where I think worldview becomes very important, they can understand that there is far more to reality and can be experienced with the five senses, and they're prepared to be open to what that is, then they'll start getting the opportunities that they require. And that brings us back to synchronicity, Bernie, because what I always say is if you're open to possibilities, if you're open to something being different to how you understand it to be at the moment, if you believe on some level, but you haven't quite you can't trust in it fully yet, but if you can act as if life has purpose and meaning, as if uh, it's a trustworthy universe, like, saying trust the universe. If you can just open up and trust the universe, then you'll find that the synchronicities happen and things will come in which actually support you on that kind of journey. Don't close down on options. Don't close down on on possibilities.
You've mentioned some powerful words, actually. By that I mean love and trust. And I do like to look at words and see what they mean. Uh, and there are many different forms of love. The most difficult one that I think human beings face is interpersonal love, love for each other or love with each other. And love between people more than loving the oneness, maybe, more than loving working on consciousness education, more than loving some like a great person in whatever great means to you. Loving another person means trusting that other person. Those others, except for trusting the consciousness, which maybe we could talk about, is like requires a lot of detail. I mean, key details. Trust does. So, could you talk about the various forms of love that you're referring to, or what you mean by love, and what you mean by trust?
Okay. Well, I think it starts from, you know, that ontology that we began with, that that our way of understanding reality. And I said that my fundamental way of understanding reality is that is that it's consciousness that has the core qualities of love and creativity. And by creativity, I do mean, along with Federico Fagin, I do mean free will. So we have choices in how we act. So that love is just in pure form. It's what we do experience when we're in our most elevated state, if you like, if we're in our kind of highest state of being. And then I think it's part of the human journey into how we translate that powerful sense of what is ultimate in the universe, how we translate that into our everyday actions. And that is the hard work. I mean, this is
Yes.
one of the reasons why I got disillusioned with the Christian church when I was 16, because what I would do is I'd sit in the church and listen to the vicar saying, having a lovely sermon on love your neighbor as yourself, and then you'd go to, and everybody in the congregation sitting there and lapping it up and smiling and say, yes, of course. And then you'd go to the back of the church and they'd all be bitching about each other at the back of the church and gossiping about each other. And where is the love in this? And so it's easy to sense the overall principle and say love your neighbor as yourself. The hard work comes, and this is why I say everybody has to follow their own individual journey. What does that mean for each person when they seek to live with others in on a practical way? How do you deal with the kind of feelings of anger or frustration or whatever? And there isn't an overall answer to that, Bernie, other than every person needs to work that out for themselves. And people talk about things like tough love because it doesn't necessarily always mean being nice or giving way to other people. I think it's a very complex question. So, but I think the reason is that if our challenge is to express the one or express that ultimate loving reality in material form, that's a hard task. That's a hard challenge. And that's what, on this human journey, we're learning to do better. And the more we can talk about it with each other, the more we can share the challenges and the personal difficulties each of us have, the more vulnerable we can be in that kind of way, then the more likely we are ultimately to achieve what I feel the ultimate purpose of and meaning of the universe is. So my sense is that the ultimate purpose and meaning of the universe is for that pure love of infinite and eternal consciousness to manifest itself purely in material form, to just be able to express itself in pure form. We've clearly got a long way to go as a human race when you look at the wars and the suffering and all of that. But you get pockets, you get people, you get in every community, you'll see expressions of pure love at work, of what people do very often not noticed, not commented on. People living those kind of expressions of love. So it is possible, but we're a long way from getting there, and it's whether we'll be able to get there without destroying ourselves in the meantime. Is the big question.
Well, I agree with you. It's a long road uh, for a lot of people. And the question is, can 3% be enough to transform the whole world? As uh, some people think, you need 11%. I mean, and what is that percent doing? We don't know. But what you do know, and what you have just suggested, that being able to love each other as much as you heard it said in the church was hard for people to do it outside of church. So I add to the ontology and epistemology uh, uh, the interpersonal capacities that we need to develop, not only from within ourselves to know ourselves better, but to be able to translate that into a connection with another person that can, after a while, evolve into a loving connection.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I think that's happening with a lot with many. Does happen with many individuals.
And we need to learn how those many individuals are doing it, uh, so that those who are interested but are need a little bit of exposure, and the exposure comes, yes, from the experience with someone else who can love you, but also from learning about yourself and knowing simple things like how to do I statements well to somebody, which I am still learning. Rather than saying this at somebody, learning how to say, I feel this, I'm experiencing this in our interaction now. And that allows the other person to be separate from me, and me not trying to jam something into somebody, but saying how I experience. So we recognize with I statements our own autonomy and the other person's autonomy. And that particular thing to do is not easy.
No, and I think they've probably always taken place in some contexts, and I think certainly in different conferences and events that I'm going to, I think people are learning to have more of these deep conversations with each other where they share at that kind of eye level, but with an equal interest and attention to what the other person is sharing. So there is a connection between those who are sharing with each other. My experience is that that is happening more and more, certainly in the different events I go to. And also, if you're going to do it in a more formal way, you spoke about home dialogue. If people are wanting to explore what that means for themselves in the company of others, uh, that would be a very good kind of way in which to evolve that kind of conversation and learning.
Yeah, and there are those doing something called nonviolent communication,
Yeah.
which is similar to all of this. So there's a lot happening. And I'm delighted to know, Joan, as we come to the end of our conversation today, that you are finding more and more people with whom to experience um, I thou relationships, where we recognize the individual as separate and we respect that individuality and don't try to demand that they think what the way we're thinking, but respect how they're thinking, how they're feeling, how they're experiencing the world.
And the more you're able to do that, the more we grow and expand together.
The more we're able to do, the more we expand together. I I'll sing that song with you, Joan. I'll sing.
Thank you, Bernie.
You're welcome. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for the conversation.
You're welcome.